"You're my woman now," said the wounded sheriff, after the quiet settler girl pulled him from the burning stagecoach. The smell hit me before I was even awake. Burning leather and horsehair and something sweeter underneath, which I'd come to know later, was the pine crates that had been packed in the boot, full of somebody's household goods they were bringing out to start over. That sweet smell, pitch pine and cedar and the char of somebody's beginning. I didn't know where I was for a good while. The ground was hard under me and wet, which told me it had been raining while I was out, and there was a sound like a bellows being worked, slow and labored, and it took me longer than it should have to figure out that was my own breathing. Left shoulder. That's what I cataloged first. There are ways you learn to take stock of yourself when you've been hurt before, and I had been, enough times that the process was nearly automatic by then. Left shoulder first, because that was the fire I could feel clearest. A deep burning ache like something had been dislocated and then jammed back wrong. Then the back of my skull was tender and swollen under my fingers when I got my right hand up there to check. Then my abs on the left side. 3 of them at least were cracked, maybe broken clean. Tell by the way the air caught when I tried for a full breath. And then my knee. My right knee, which had never been right since a horse fell on me up in the Dakotas 8 years prior, had twisted again in whatever had happened. Whatever had happened. I lay still and tried to put it together. We'd been 2 hours out of Mineral Springs, coming southwest through the canyon country. The stage was running late on account of a wheel repair done hasty at the last relay station, and I'd been riding shotgun, not for the line but because Hector Munn, the county sheriff before me, had been shot dead 3 months prior, and I was the man who'd taken his badge and his troubles both. There was a lockbox aboard, company money, though whose company I still couldn't tell you with certainty. Men with money don't always tell you where it came from when they need it moved quiet. I'd agreed to ride because the alternative was letting it go unguarded, and I couldn't do that. Not with my name on the badge. The other passengers, I tried to remember who they were. An elderly couple going to visit their son, the man with a thick German accent and his wife who never spoke, but watched everything with small, dark, worried eyes. Cattle buyer out of Tucson, who smelled like he'd been celebrating something before boarded, and a girl. A young woman, though she had that quality some women have, where you can't quite pin their age because what registers first isn't years. It's something steadier than that. She'd been sitting across from me in the coach, very upright, very contained, canvas bag on her lap and her hands folded over it, like she was keeping something safe. Brown dress, dark hair pinned back severe. She hadn't said much since Mineral Springs. Just watched the canyon walls go past. I remembered her now because she'd been the last thing I'd seen clearly before the road dropped out from under us. The horses had spooked. I didn't know then what had caused it. I know now it was a gunshot from the canyon rim, men after the lockbox. In the moment it was simply a lurch and a scream from the animals. And then the coach going sideways. The driver hauling on the lines and yelling, and me grabbing the iron rail on the roof, and then losing it as the whole rig went over the bank. I remembered the sensation of falling that wasn't really falling, more like the world folding, and then the ground, and then nothing. She'd gotten to me. Somehow, in all of it, she'd gotten to me. That's what I was putting together when I heard her. She was somewhere to my right, and slightly behind me, out of my eye line, and she was doing something that involved a tearing sound, cloth tearing, deliberate and methodical, and she was talking under her breath while she did it. Not to me, not to anyone. Just a running quiet murmur, too. The kind a person makes when they're working through a problem, and the talking is part of the thinking. I lay still and listened and couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it. "I'm awake," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. Tearing stopped. Then she was beside me, moving fast and low over the wet ground, and she put her hand on my face. Not gently, exactly, firmly, the way you'd check a horse. She turned my head to one side, then the other, looking at my eyes, and then she sat back on her heels. "Pupils the same size," she said. "That's good. You a doctor?" "No." She was already moving, back to whatever she'd been tearing. "My father was. I was his only child, and he was too stubborn to let that stop him from teaching me." Pushed myself up on my right elbow, and the ribs screamed at me, and I stopped. Don't, she said, without looking up. I need to. You need to lie flat until I've wrapped those ribs. You've got at least two broken, and if you move wrong and one of them shifts into your lung, that's the end of this story. She glanced over at me then. Her eyes were dark, like I'd remembered. Very steady. Few more minutes won't cost you what you think it'll cost you. I lay back down. She came back with strips of cloth that had been, I realized, petticoat, torn into long, careful bands. She worked without asking permission, and without apology, and without wasted motion. When she started wrapping my ribs, she had to get close and I could smell wood smoke in her hair. And something underneath it, clean and specific, juniper. The others, I said. She didn't answer right away. Just kept working, fingers pressing, checking her tension. The German couple got clear early, she said finally. The woman is shaken, and the man has a cut on his head, but they're ambulatory. The cattle buyer was thrown clear and came up walking. He's gone for help, back toward Mineral Springs. The driver. She stopped, adjusted her grip. The driver didn't make it. The coach came down on him. I closed my eyes. The lockbox, I said. I don't know anything about a lockbox. There were men on the rim. Before we went over. She was quiet for a moment. I saw 3 riders south moving away. They didn't come down, which meant they'd either gotten what they came for or decided it wasn't worth the trouble once the coach had gone over the bank. I didn't know which, and there wasn't anything I could do about it in that moment. Pinned to the wet ground with my ribs being wrapped by a stranger. Your name, I said. Clara Brecht. I'm Sheriff Voss, Tom Voss. I know who you are, she said. I saw your badge when you boarded. She finished the wrapping and sat back. Then she looked at me. Not the way some women look at a man who's hurt. That soft, frightened looking. Straight on. Like she was deciding something. Your shoulder is dislocated, she said. I know it. I can put it back. I've done it before. Out here. I grew up 3 miles outside of a town that had 11 people in it and a doctor who rode out twice a year. Yes, out here. She said it without rancor, just as fact. It'll hurt. She did it. Pain was a white sheet across my vision for about 4 seconds, and then it subsided into something manageable. She had a strong grip and she knew the angle. The trick is the angle, working with the joint rather than against it. And when it was over, she did her hands for a moment and then at me, checking my face. Better, she said. Better, I said. She helped me sit up then, slow. One hand braced on my back. When I was upright, I could see the wreck clearly for the first time. The coach had gone over the bank and down about 30 feet before it had hit a cluster of boulders and caught fire. The lamp oil from the interior. Lanterns, I supposed. The horses were loose and gone. Probably halfway to Mineral Springs by now. The driver was still under the wreck. And I made myself look at that and acknowledge it and then set it aside because there was nothing to be done for him, and there was plenty still to be done for the living. The old couple sheltering under a rock overhang about 50 yards away. See the man's white head. The cattle buyer was gone. Just me and Clara Brecht on the wet ground with the wreck still smoldering behind us. How long was I out? I asked. A little over an hour, she said. Closer to 90 minutes. She paused. I wasn't sure you'd wake up. You hit your head hard when the coach rolled. An hour and a half. She'd been here with me for an hour and a half, tearing up her petticoat and waiting to see if I'd come back. You could have gone with the cattle buyer, I said. Back to Mineral Springs. She was looking at the smoldering wreck. She didn't answer for a moment. I could have, she said. That was all she said about it. She stood up and went to check on the German couple, and I sat on the wet ground with my wrapped ribs and my put-back shoulder and my bad knee stretched out in front of me, and I thought about that. She could have. She hadn't. There's a certain kind of persons you meet sometimes, rare, and you know them when you find them, who decides things without a lot of noise about it. No announcement, no request for recognition. They just see what needs doing and they do it. And afterward they act like it was the obvious choice, and they can't understand why anyone would make a different one. Clara Brecht was that kind of person. I'd been a lawman for going on 20 years by then. Started as a deputy up in Nevada, moved south as the territory opened up, worked my way into the badge the hard way, not through knowing the right people or having the right family name, just through being the man who showed up and kept showing up when other men didn't. I'd been shot 4 times, stabbed once, I'd buried 2 partners and arrested men I'd considered friends. I'd spent most of those 20 years being the thing that stood between whatever order existed and the chaos that was always pressing at the edges. And I'd done it without complaint and without much recognition, and mostly without any person in the world who gave a particular damn whether I came home or didn't. My wife had left 11 years before. She hadn't been wrong to go. I'd been gone more than I was there. And the work had made me into something hard and watchful that she hadn't married and hadn't bargained for. She'd gone back to her people in Ohio. I hadn't contested it. I'd thought back then that I was relieved. I understood later that I'd just stopped expecting anything different. That's not the same as relief, even if it feels like it for a while. I got myself upright eventually, with the help of a chunk of rock, tested the knee, bad, but bearing weight. I went over to where Clara was crouched by the German couple and I did what I could for them, which wasn't much beyond making sure the man's head wound wasn't as serious as it looked. Head wounds bleed fierce. It's alarming. It's often not as bad as it appears. This one wasn't too bad. He'd have a headache for a week and a scar and a story. We waited. The afternoon wore on, and the clouds came in thicker, and the temperature dropped. Clara organized what she could. She'd salvaged a length of canvas from the wreck before the fire had spread, and she'd gotten some of the cargo boxes that had been thrown clear, and she made a kind of shelter for the old couple, working it like she'd done it before. The German woman still hadn't spoken, watched her with those small dark eyes, and at one point reached out and put her hand briefly on Clara's arm, and Clara accepted that and moved on. I watched her while I kept an eye on the canyon approaches, the men from the rim. I hadn't stopped thinking about them. Around 4 in the afternoon she came and stood beside me. "You're watching for them," she said. "Might be they come back when they figure out they didn't get the box," I said. "Might be they don't. Hard to say. What was in it? Best not to know." She considered that. "All right." She looked out at the canyon, the same direction I was looking. "You've been on your feet for 2 hours on a knee that looks like a winter melon." I almost smiled at that. Almost. "It's held before." "How many times has it held before?" I didn't answer that. "Sit down," she said. "I can watch." "That's not. I have better eyes than you do," she said. It wasn't an argument or a challenge. She said it the way she said most things, like a fact she'd already checked and confirmed. 2 good legs. "Sit down, Sheriff. I'll tell you if anything moves." I sat down. I've thought about that moment a lot in the years since, the decision to sit down. It seems like a small thing, a man with a bad knee accepting that he should take some weight off it. Practical as anything. I'd been the man who didn't sit down for a long time by then. The man who kept going. Who didn't let on how bad things were, because letting on meant asking something of someone, and I'd gotten out of the habit of that. You get out of it slowly, almost without noticing, until one day the habit is just gone, and you can't quite remember how it used to feel to lean on another person. Sat down, and she stood where I'd been standing, and she watched the canyon, and nothing came out of it, and the afternoon passed. Help arrived just before dark. The cattle buyer had made it back. Brought 3 men from Mineral Springs with horses and a wagon. They came clattering into the canyon with lanterns swinging and found us where we were. The old couple, wrapped in the canvas, under the overhang. I'm sitting against a boulder with my knee out, and Clara standing at the edge of the light. One of the men from Mineral Springs was named Pete Galloway. I knew him slightly, a good man, ran the feed store. He came over and crouched beside me and looked at my ribs and my shoulder and my knee, making that noise men make when they see another man busted up. That low, involuntary hiss through the teeth. "You look like hell, Tom," he said. "I've been told," I said. "The woman wrap you up like that?" "She did." He looked over at Clara. She was helping the German woman up from the ground, careful and steady, the old woman gripping her arm. "She a nurse?" "Her father was a doctor," I said. He watched Clara a moment more. "Lucky she was on the stage." "Yes," I said, "lucky." We got the old couple into the wagon first. The cattle buyer was useless, still rattled and inclined toward talking too much, so the Mineral Springs men managed it without him. Then Pete and one of the others got me up, and between them walked me to the wagon, which I didn't love, but accepted because the knee truly wouldn't do it alone, and I didn't have any pretense left by that point. Clara walked herself. We rode back to Mineral Springs in the dark, and the silence that comes after a hard thing, the kind of silence that has some weight to it. The lanterns swung. The old woman had fallen asleep against her husband's shoulder. I was between Pete and one of his men, and Clara was at the tail of the wagon, her canvas bag back on her lap, hands folded over it the same way they'd been when she boarded the stage that morning. I watched her for a while in the dark. She caught me at it once and didn't look away. Just held it, steady for a moment, and then looked back at the dark road behind us. Mineral Springs had a doctor, a real one. He was 3 sheets to the wind when Pete fetched him, but he sobered up fast enough when he saw the state of me, and he confirmed what Clara had already done. Ribs wrapped right, shoulder seated right, head clear of any real damage. And then he re-wrapped me tighter, and told me not to breathe too enthusiastically for a month. He wanted me to stay, and I told him I'd stay the night, and then I had things to do. He said some choice words about lawmen. Clara had taken a room at the boarding house. The boarding house and the hotel were the same building, more or less. Mrs. Hennessy ran it, a stout and efficient woman who asked no unnecessary questions. I'd stayed there before, when business had brought me through Mineral Springs, and Mrs. Hennessy had a room for me as well, and I slept for 12 hours in it. In the mornings I found Clara in the dining room. She was at a corner table, drinking coffee. She had a cup in both hands, not the handle, just holding the warm ceramic, and she was looking out the window at the street. She looked up when I came in. I sat down across from her. We didn't say anything for a moment. Mrs. Hennessy brought me coffee without being asked. Bless her. Where were you headed? I asked. Elbow Creek, she said, 40 miles west. I have a parcel of land there from my uncle's estate. You're going to work a parcel alone? She looked at me without blinking. Yes. It's hard country out there. I grew up in hard country, she said. As I may have mentioned, I drank my coffee. She drank hers outside. The street was starting to come alive with the morning's business. A man leading a mule, a woman shaking a rug from an upstairs window, 2 boys running about some errand. You saved my life yesterday, I said. She looked at her coffee. I'm not sure that's accurate. You might have come around on your own. The shoulder? Well, a small pause. The shoulder needed doing, and you stayed. When you didn't have to. She looked up at me then. She had a way of looking at a person that felt like being assessed, honestly and carefully, without feeling any people feel sometimes do, when they don't want you to feel seen too plainly. She looked at me like she didn't mind me knowing she was looking. I'm going to tell you something that I might regret telling you, she said. All right. When the coach went over and I got clear, I looked back and I saw you. You'd been thrown and you weren't moving, and she stopped. Her hands tightened on the coffee cup slightly. I didn't know you, but there was something about the way you'd been sitting on the stage, the whole ride, the way you watched. You weren't nervous, you weren't showing off, you just watched. Like the watching was the job. She looked at the window briefly and back at me. It seemed wrong to leave that kind of man in the mud. I didn't know what to say to that for a moment. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did, and I hadn't expected to, and it landed somewhere deep and quiet in me that hadn't received much in a long time. I'm going to need to get to Elbow Creek, I said. Might be I should make sure the road's clear. Given what happened yesterday, she studied me. That's not the reason, she said. No, I said. It's not the only reason. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set her coffee cup down on the table and looked out the window again, and something shifted in her face, something small and private, and then it was gone, and she was composed again. The stage that goes west leaves at 10, she said. If there is still a stage, given that the last one ended up at the bottom of a canyon. I'll find us a way, I said. She looked at me. Use. Unless you'd rather. I didn't say I'd rather, she said. I said a pause, and something in her voice was dry and level and warm all at the same time. Like you expected me to argue about it. I hadn't expected that. I'd half expected her to tell me she didn't need accompanying. She had that quality. The quality of a person who's learned to do things alone and has made peace with it. Some people who carry that quality will fight off any offer of company out of habit, out of pride in their own self-sufficiency. She didn't fight it off, she just noted it. I found us a way west, not the stage. I borrowed 2 horses from a man who owed the county a favor and was happy enough to loan them, and we loaded our things, and left Mineral Springs by noon. The road west through that country is something I can still see if I close my eyes. Late spring, so the brush was still green enough to look almost lush by that territory's standards. The sky went on forever, the way it does out there, blue going to white at the edges. It smelled like sage, and something dry underneath the sage, peculiar dry smell of that particular plateau country, and the horses were good horses, and moved well. She rode well. That was the first thing. Easy in the saddle, not fighting the horse, just there. Her back straight, her hands light on the reins. We didn't talk a great deal that first day. I was still sore enough that conversation took effort. And she wasn't a person who filled silence for the sake of filling it, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists between people who are paying attention to the same things. The road, the country, the sky, whether anything was moving on the ridges, and have no need to perform otherwise. Toward evening she asked me about my knee, not in a leading way, just plain. Horse fell on me, I said. 8 years ago, bad winter in the Dakotas. Did a doctor see it? Eventually. She looked over at me. What does eventually mean? Means I rode 3 more days on it before anyone looked at it. She shook her head. Not dramatically, just the small, deliberate shake of a person receiving information that confirms what they already suspected. You do that thing, she said, where you keep going past the point where a reasonable person would stop. It's been said before. I expect it has. She looked ahead at the road. My father was the same way. He thought taking care of himself was somehow a lesser use of his time than taking care of other people. Was he? Usually. A pause. But the times when he let someone else take care of him, those are the ones I remember best. I rode with that for a while. We camped that night off the road, in a hollow that had some trees and a small spring, built the fire. And she managed the cooking, which she was better at than me. And we ate beans and salt pork, and some bread she'd had in her bag from Mineral Springs, and the sky overhead came on black and enormous and full of stars. Your land, I said. Your uncle's parcel. You know what state it's in? Said, the house needs work, she said. I expect that means it needs tearing down and starting over. She said it without much emotion. It's the same plain factual tone. I know how to do most of it. Do you? I told you. Small town, 11 people, a doctor who came twice a year. If you couldn't do it yourself, it didn't get done. She glanced at me across the fire. Can you? Can I what? Build things. Fix things. I thought about it, honestly. Some, I said. Better at fixing than building, maybe. Most people are, she said. I watched the fire for a moment. How long have you been doing this? She asked. The law. Going on 20 years now. You think you'll do it much longer? It was a question people didn't often ask me directly. Most people assumed I'd do it until I couldn't do it, and then after that they didn't think about it because why would they? I was the law, which was a function rather than a person. Functions don't retire so much as they get replaced. I don't know, I said. Hadn't thought about what else I'd do. She looked at me across the fire, and something in her face was careful and measuring, and then she said, people who are very good at one thing for a very long time usually have trouble imagining that anything else could be worth doing. A pause. It doesn't mean there's nothing else worth doing. I didn't answer that. But I thought about it that night, lying on the ground with my saddle under my head and the stars overhead and the small sounds of the horses in the dark and the dying fire nearby. Shh. I thought about 20 years of being the law and what it had cost and what it had given and whether those things were in balance. I didn't come to any conclusions, but I thought about it, which was more than I'd done before. We made Elbow Creek the following afternoon. It was a small settlement, smaller than Mineral Springs, barely a town yet, more like a town in the process of deciding whether it wanted to be one. A main street with a general store, a livery, a building that was either a saloon or trying to be. Some houses set back from the street, and out beyond the settlement, the land parcels, the homesteads in various stages of establishment, the whole human project of putting roots into ground that had never been asked to hold them before. Clara's uncle's land was on the south side. About a mile from the center of town, we rode out to see it. The house was in the state she'd expected. A small cabin that had gone to ruin, one wall partially collapsed, the roof caved in on one end. But the land itself was good. A creek ran through it. The soil was dark and deep-looking, and the location had a natural shelter from the northwest, by a low ridge. She stood in front of the ruins of the cabin and looked at it. Tear it down, she said, to herself or to me, I wasn't sure. Start with the good wall and work out from there. South face slope over there would grow a garden, I said. She looked where I was looking. Yes, she said. It would. I stayed. Not on that day. I had to get back. There was county business I'd already let go too long. The wreck had to be officially reported, and the driver's death needed to be documented, and there were men on a canyon rim who needed to be accounted. I rode back east and spent 6 weeks doing what needed doing, but I came back. I want to be clear about that. About what I mean when I say I came back. I don't mean I showed up with any particular speech prepared, or any understanding of what was going to happen. I mean, I did the work in front of me, and then I turned my horse west, because there was no other direction that made sense anymore. There's a thing that happens when you've been alone a long time, and then for a few days you aren't, and the difference is stark enough to show you what you've been missing. I hadn't known I was missing it, because I hadn't had a reference point. Now I had one. I rode into Elbow Creek on a Thursday in late June. The cabin was already gone when I got to the parcel. She'd taken it down. I don't know how. She must have help from someone in town. There was no way one person tears down a cabin alone. The site was cleared, and the foundation stones were laid in a new configuration. And there were fresh-cut logs waiting nearby. She was on her knees in the garden plot when I rode up, turning the soil with a short-handled tool. She heard the horse and looked up, and for a moment her face was just her face, open and unguarded, and I saw something in it that I hadn't been sure I'd see. She stood up and brushed her hands on her skirt. You took your time, she said. I had things to settle, I said. They're settled. She looked at me, then at the horse, then at the pack behind my saddle. How long are the things settled for? I don't know yet, I said honestly. Long as needed, maybe. She considered that. The north wall is giving me trouble, she said. The logs won't seat right at the corner. I can look at that, I said. I thought you might. She turned back to the garden, and then stopped, and turned back to me again. Elbow Creek doesn't have a sheriff, she said. I know. They've been talking about needing one. Have they? There's a man named Garrett who thinks he ought to be it. She said this in the flat tone of a person conveying informations, without much investment in the outcome. Most people in town don't think so. Do they think? They think they'd like someone else. A pause. Someone with some experience. I was still on the horse. I looked at the land around the site. The cleared cabin footprint, the stacked logs, the dark-turned garden, the creek running below, edge to the north. I'd need a place to stay, I said, while we build. She looked up at me. The same look as before. Straight on, honest. There's the barn, she said. It's in better shape than the house was. A beat for now. I got down off the horse. My knee took the landing the way it always did, that first sharp protest. I didn't show it on my face, habit. And then I noticed she was watching, and I thought about what she'd said the first night, about her father and taking care of himself, about the times when he let someone else take care of him being the ones she remembered best. I let the knee show on my face. Just for a second, she saw it. She didn't make anything of it. She just nodded slightly, like something had been confirmed. I tied the horse, and she poured me water from a bucket, and we walked over to the north corner to look at the problem with the logs. We talked about it for a while. The way you talk about a concrete problem when you're both looking at the same thing, and trying to solve it. She'd been trying to seat the corner logs by herself, which was why they weren't seating right. It was a two-person job, angle and pressure, both required at once. I showed her the line she needed, and she held it while I drove the wedge, and then it seated clean. There, she said. There, I said. She was very close beside me. The late afternoon light on the land was the color of wheat. She smelled like juniper and turned earth, and I thought about the night of the wreck, the smell of wood smoke in her hair, how I'd cataloged it without meaning to. She looked up at me. I'm glad you came back, she said. She said it the same way she said everything. No performance, no build-up, just the plain fact of it. My hand on her face, and she leaned into it the way a person leans into something they've been wanting. Not desperate, not relieved. Just there, like it was the natural thing, which it was. Clara, I said. Don't make a speech, she said, just stay. I stayed. There's a thing about being a man who spent his life being useful to everyone except himself. Useful to the county, useful to the law, useful to whatever situation required someone to stand in front of it and absorb the impact. It hollows you after a while. Not all at once, and not in any way you can put your finger on directly. But somewhere along the years you lose the sense of yourself as a person who is owed anything. In return, you become a function. And functions can go on a long time running like that, efficient and purposeful, and you can mistake that efficiency for being fine. Then, someone pulls you out of the mud and wraps your ribs and puts your shoulder back and stays, when they didn't have to, and you start to remember. That fall we built the house. Not quickly, we built it right, which is slower. Clara had opinions about every decision, and they were generally good opinions. And I had skills she didn't have, and she had skills I didn't have. And between us the thing came together plumb and square, and solid in a way that a house built by one person usually isn't. The Elbow Creek Town Council voted in October. Garrett got 2 votes, both of which were probably his own. I got the rest. I pinned the new badge on in the morning, in the kitchen of the house we'd built. Clara standing in front of me, and she straightened it when I had it on, and looked at it and then at me. "Suits you," she said. "Lot of trouble in a small county," I said. "Might be long hours sometimes." "I know what I agreed to," she said. She looked up at me, and her eyes were steady and dark, the same as they'd always been. "And you know what you agreed to." I did. There'd been a morning about 3 weeks prior, early, when I'd come around a corner of the half-finished house, and found her sitting on the ground, with her back against the new south wall, face tipped up to the sun, eyes closed. She was just sitting there taking the morning sun, completely still, completely private in whatever she was thinking. And I'd stood there for probably half a minute, long enough to know I didn't want to go anywhere else. She'd opened her eyes and seen me standing there. "You're staring," she said. "You're my woman," I said. It came out flat and certain, the way facts come out when you stop arguing with them. "That's what I know." She'd looked at me for a moment. "I know," she said, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. "Elbow Creek. That's where we stayed. The knee never got fully right. It got better. She'd made me do exercises for it that I thought were foolish and turned out not to be. And over that first year it strengthened up enough that I stopped noticing it except on cold mornings. The county was manageable. Hard, sometimes. It's always hard when people are trying to make something new in a place that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be, but manageable. I kept going past the point a reasonable person would stop, sometimes. She kept telling me so, and she was usually right. I was getting better at stopping before that point, which is a thing I'd never thought I needed to learn. On the 3rd year, in February, we sat on the porch in the evening, when it was cold enough to see breath, and she put her head on my shoulder, and we watched the stars come up, over the ridge. The ridge she'd identified when we first stood on the land. The natural shelter from the northwest. It worked exactly as she'd said it would. I put my arm around her, and she was warm and solid and real, and I thought about the canyon road and the smell of burning cedar and pine and the wet, cold ground, and her hands on my face, checking my pupils, not gently but firmly, the way you check on something that matters. This woman chose me. Out of all the things she could have chosen, going back to Mineral Springs, leaving me for someone to find, making the sensible, practical decision and getting herself to safety. She looked at a man in the mud and decided he was worth pulling out. She doesn't make a lot of noise about it. She never did. But on that porch in February with the stars coming up, I turned my head and I said, "Clara." She made a sound, listening. "You know what you did for me," I said. "I just want you to know I know it too." She was quiet for a while. "I know you know," she said. Sat there until it was full dark and the cold got too serious. And then we went inside and I put a log on the fire and she put the kettle on. And that was all, and it was enough. And I was a man with a good woman and a square house. And a county that needed keeping. And it was everything. And it was mine.